Michael Green enjoyed the quiet mornings in his neighborhood. Each day started the same way. He woke early, brewed a pot of coffee, and stepped outside to the porch with his favorite blue mug. The street was calm at dawn. Birds hopped along the trimmed lawns, and sunlight spread slowly over the roofs of the houses. For 5 years, he and his wife Laura had built a peaceful life here. Their home was not the largest in the community, but it felt perfect to them. 2 stories of warm brick, a white porch railing, and a small garden that Laura loved. Every corner of the house carried their memories: the first dinner they hosted for neighbors, the night they painted the kitchen a cheerful yellow, the weekends spent planting flowers and trimming hedges. On this spring morning, Laura joined Michael outside. She carried a small basket of fresh laundry to hang on the line and smiled at the sight of their front yard. Over the past month she had planted new roses, red, yellow, and a soft pink. The blooms gave the street a bright, welcoming look. "Your roses are finally opening," Michael said, sipping his coffee. "They make the house look happy," Laura replied. "I think the neighbors like them too. Mrs. Turner stopped yesterday just to say how pretty they are." Michael smiled. It was these little touches that made the house feel alive. They had chosen this neighborhood because it promised a friendly atmosphere and a sense of community. Most of their neighbors were kind and easy to talk to. After breakfast, Laura walked to the mailbox at the edge of their driveway. The wooden post was decorated with a small bird carved by Michael years ago. She opened the metal door and noticed a crisp white envelope stamped with the familiar logo of the Homeowners Association, HOA for short. Laura carried it inside, curious. The HOA sometimes sent reminders about seasonal cleanup or upcoming community picnics, nothing serious. She set the envelope on the kitchen counter and finished folding laundry before opening it. When she finally slid it open, her eyes narrowed. The letter was short and direct: "Notice of fine, unauthorized flower planting. Amount due, $90. Payment deadline, 10 days from the date of this letter." Laura read it twice. A fine? For planting roses? She walked to Michael's home office where he was checking emails. "Michael," she said, holding the letter out, "you need to see this." He took it, scanned the page, and frowned. $90. For what? They say unauthorized flower planting. I only planted them along the edge of the sidewalk, inside our property line. Michael set the paper on his desk. That doesn't even make sense. There are flowers on our land. Laura crossed her arms, confusion turning to irritation. It must be a mistake. Maybe they think we planted on the shared path. Even if they did, Michael replied, the roses are nowhere near it. We'll call them. Later that afternoon, Laura phoned the HOA office. A polite receptionist answered and confirmed that the letter was not a mistake. The board received a complaint, the receptionist said. The president of the association requested that a fine be issued for planting without prior approval. Laura kept her voice calm. I wasn't aware that I needed approval to plant flowers on my own property. I'm just passing along the information, the receptionist replied gently. You can attend the next HOA meeting if you want to dispute the fine. After hanging up, Laura stared at the phone for a long moment. Michael walked in and could read her face immediately. They said it's not a mistake, she explained. Apparently someone complained, and the HOA president ordered a fine. Michael rubbed his forehead. That would be Karen. Everyone in the neighborhood knew Karen Mitchell, the HOA president. She was known for her sharp eyes and strict reading of the rules. She often walked the streets with a clipboard, noting even the smallest infractions. Some neighbors called her dedicated, others whispered the word controlling. Laura sighed. I don't want a fight, but this is unreasonable. We'll go to the meeting, Michael said firmly. We'll explain and sort it out. The following Thursday evening, the community clubhouse was bright with fluorescent lights. Folding chairs formed neat rows, and neighbors chatted quietly before the meeting started. Michael and Laura took seats near the middle. Karen sat at the head table, wearing a crisp white blouse and holding her usual clipboard. Her posture was perfect, and her expression serious. Beside her sat two other board members who looked less stern but equally attentive. When the meeting reached the section for disputes, Michael raised his hand. We received a notice about a $90 fine for planting flowers, he began. We believe this is a misunderstanding. Karen looked up, her eyes cool. Your wife planted roses without submitting the required landscaping request. The rules state that any changes to the front yard must be approved by the board. Laura spoke calmly. The roses are planted along the inside edge of our yard. They don't block the sidewalk, and they match the neighborhood style. Many other homes have similar flowers. Karen tapped her clipboard. Rules are rules. Approval must come before planting. Michael leaned forward slightly. The guidelines mention major landscaping changes: new trees, fences, structural work. Not a few rose bushes. Karen did not blink. The board considers any addition to the front landscaping a change. The fine stands. A quiet murmur passed through the audience. A few neighbors exchanged looks, but no one spoke aloud. Laura met Karen's gaze. We're happy to follow fair rules, but this feels unnecessary. The flowers are small, and several neighbors have similar plants. Karen's voice hardened. If everyone ignored the process, we'd have chaos. The fine is non-negotiable. You have 10 days to pay. Michael felt frustration rise, but he kept his tone steady. We'll review the bylaws and respond in writing. Without another word, he took Laura's hand, and they left the clubhouse. Outside, the evening air was cool and quiet. Laura exhaled slowly. She wouldn't even listen. Michael squeezed her hand. We'll handle this. You did nothing wrong. As they walked home under the streetlights, the roses in their yard seemed to glow faintly in the dusk. What had begun as a simple act of planting beauty had turned into an unexpected battle. The next morning, Laura watered her roses as usual. Neighbors passed by, offering small smiles of support. Mrs. Turner from across the street paused to admire the blooms. They look lovely, she said. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Laura thanked her, grateful for the kindness. Yet the fine weighed on her mind. She had always believed this neighborhood was built on friendship and respect. Now she wondered how something so small could cause such tension. Michael joined her with a fresh cup of coffee. We'll go through the HOA handbook today, he said. If there's no clear rule, we'll appeal the fine in writing. Laura nodded. She was calm on the surface, but inside she felt a quiet resolve forming. She had never liked conflict, yet she believed in standing for what was right. As the morning sun warmed the petals of her roses, Laura decided she would not back down. The flowers represented more than color now. They stood for their right to care for their home without fear of unfair punishment. Neither of them knew that this small dispute would soon grow into something far larger, something that would reveal strength, dignity, and a surprising truth about Laura herself, a truth that even Karen would have to respect. Saturday morning began with a sky so bright and clear that it seemed to promise peace. Laura Green hoped the day would stay quiet. She watered her roses, enjoying the soft hum of bees moving from bloom to bloom. The neighborhood usually felt calm on weekends, when families walked dogs or children rode bikes along the sidewalks. Michael left early for a quick errand at the hardware store. Back in an hour, he told Laura, giving her a reassuring smile. He knew the HOA letter still sat on the kitchen counter like a stubborn shadow, but they had decided to review the association rules before responding. Laura stayed outside, trimming a few stray branches and listening to the gentle rustle of leaves. She tried to focus on the scent of roses instead of the frustration in her mind. Then a sharp knock echoed from the front door. Laura wiped her hands on a towel and opened it to find Karen Mitchell standing on the porch. Karen held her familiar clipboard like a shield. Two other HOA board members, Mr. Caldwell and Mrs. Jennings, stood a step behind her. "Good morning," Karen said, though her voice carried little warmth. "We need to speak about the unpaid fine." Laura steadied her breath. "The deadline hasn't passed. My husband and I plan to review the HOA guidelines before we respond." Karen's lips pressed into a thin line. "The rules are clear. The roses were planted without approval. Payment is expected." Laura gestured toward the blooming flowers. "These are inside our property line. They don't block the sidewalk or violate any safety code." Mrs. Jennings shifted uneasily, but Karen didn't waver. "Approval must come first. If you refuse to pay, we will escalate the matter." "Escalate?" Laura asked quietly. "This is about a few rose bushes." Mr. Caldwell cleared his throat as if to speak, but Karen cut in. "We have the authority to enforce community standards. Non-payment leads to further action." Laura held her ground. "I understand the rules, but I will not pay for something that isn't against them. We will follow the appeal process in writing." Karen's eyes narrowed. "You are making this more difficult than it needs to be." "I'm only asking for fairness," Laura replied, her voice steady. Karen turned sharply, signaling the others to follow, and walked down the steps without another word. The rest of the morning passed in uneasy silence. Neighbors who had seen the small gathering whispered as they walked their dogs or pushed strollers. Laura noticed curtains shift as people peered out. When Michael returned, Laura explained what happened. He listened with a deepening frown. "She came to the door with backup. That's intimidation." Before he could say more, the distant wail of a siren drifted through the air. It grew louder, winding down their quiet street. Two police cars rolled to a stop near their driveway. Red and blue lights flashed across the calm Saturday morning. Laura's heart skipped. "What is this?" Michael stepped outside, confusion on his face. A pair of officers approached, their expressions neutral but alert. Behind them, Karen stood at the curb with her clipboard, speaking quickly to another officer and pointing toward the greenhouse. Several neighbors gathered at the ends of their driveways, drawn by the lights. The first officer, a tall man with kind eyes, greeted them. "Good morning. We received a call about a disturbance and a possible violation of neighborhood regulations." Michael blinked. "A disturbance? We've been gardening." Laura added, "There's no disturbance. We were inside until a few minutes ago." Karen marched up, voice sharp. "They are refusing a lawful order from the homeowners association. They are required to remove unapproved plantings and pay the fine. They refuse to comply." The officer turned to her, eyebrows raised. "Ma'am, HOA matters are civil issues. We don't enforce neighborhood fines unless there's a criminal concern." Karen crossed her arms. "They are in violation of community standards. Someone must enforce the rules." The officer's tone stayed calm. That isn't a police matter. This is between the association and the homeowner. Karen's face flushed a deep pink. But they are ignoring the process. Michael spoke carefully. Officer, we have a disagreement with the HOA over a letter about flowers. We intend to appeal through the proper channels. There is no disturbance here. The second officer nodded. Understood. You're well within your rights. He glanced at Karen. There's nothing for us to enforce. We'll clear the call. The first officer offered a small, polite smile to Laura. Sorry for the interruption, ma'am. Enjoy your day. Thank you, Laura said softly. The officers returned to their vehicles, and the flashing lights faded as the cars drove off. Neighbors murmured to one another, their voices low but filled with curiosity. Karen remained at the curb, clipboard clutched tight, her jaw set. For a moment, she looked as if she might argue again, but the attention of the neighborhood weighed on her. Without a word, she turned and strode down the street, her heels clicking sharply against the pavement. Michael and Laura stepped back inside, closing the door behind them. That was unbelievable, Michael said, running a hand through his hair. She called the police over flowers. Laura leaned against the wall, heart still racing. It felt like a scene from a movie. All those neighbors watching, and for what? Michael took her hands. You stayed calm. I'm proud of you. Laura managed a small smile. I didn't know what else to do. They sat at the kitchen table, the morning sun slanting across the wood. Michael pulled the HOA handbook toward them. We need to be ready. She won't stop here. Laura nodded slowly. We should write a formal letter, cite the rules, and make it clear we're appealing. But inside, something else stirred in Laura's mind. For years, she had kept her professional life separate from the neighborhood. People knew she worked for the state, but few understood her exact position. She had never mentioned her full title because she liked being known as simply Laura, the neighbor who grew roses and baked pies. Yet as she thought of Karen's actions bringing board members to her door, calling the police for a harmless disagreement, Laura felt a quiet shift inside. She didn't want conflict, but she believed in fairness. And she knew, if she chose, she had more authority than Karen could imagine. That evening, as the sun dipped low, Michael grilled dinner in the backyard. The scent of smoke and rosemary filled the air. They spoke in low voices about their next step. I can draft the letter tonight, Michael said. I'll quote the bylaws and attach photos of the roses showing they're within our property line. Laura nodded. Good. Let's give it to the board on Monday. Michael looked at her thoughtfully. You're awfully calm after all this. I'm considering something, Laura said carefully. There's another way to handle this if she keeps pushing. Michael raised an eyebrow. What way? Laura gave a small, knowing smile. I'll explain when the time is right. They ate under the fading light, the gentle sound of crickets beginning in the grass. Despite the day's tension, there was a quiet strength in Laura's eyes, a steady confidence Michael had always admired. Night settled over the neighborhood, but whispers continued among the houses. Some neighbors sent friendly messages of support, small notes slipped under the door or quick texts thanking Laura for standing her ground. Laura read them with gratitude. She loved this community and wanted to believe most people valued kindness and fairness. Still, she sensed that Karen's determination had not ended. The HOA president had built her reputation on control. She would not accept what she saw as defiance. But Laura also knew something Karen did not. True authority is not about loud voices or flashing lights. It is about quiet integrity and, if necessary, the ability to act from a position of real responsibility. As she closed the curtains and looked once more at her glowing roses under the moonlight, Laura felt a calm resolve. The confrontation had only begun, but the outcome, in her heart, was already clear. Sunday morning came with soft rain tapping against the windows. The sound usually calmed Laura Green, but today her thoughts moved faster than the drops sliding down the glass. She poured a cup of tea and sat at the kitchen table, watching the sky grow lighter. The events of the day before still felt unreal. Police cars, flashing lights, neighbors staring over a few rose bushes. She had tried to laugh about it with Michael the night before, yet a quiet uneasiness remained. Michael walked in, hair still damp from the shower. "I barely slept," he admitted. "I kept replaying those sirens in my head." Laura gave him a gentle smile. "I know. But we stayed calm." The officers understood. He sat across from her. "Karen is going to keep pushing. I read more of the HOA handbook last night. There's no rule about simple flowers." "We're right." Laura nodded. "That's why I'm not afraid." "But Michael," she hesitated, fingers tracing the rim of her mug. "There's something I haven't told you about how I might handle this." Michael raised an eyebrow. "I'm listening." Laura took a slow breath. "You know I work for the State Housing and Community Development Department. But I don't think you realize my full title. I'm the Deputy Director for Policy and Compliance." Michael blinked, surprised. "Deputy Director? You never said you were that high up." "I don't like to bring it up outside the office," Laura explained. "I enjoy being just Laura here, neighbor, gardener, friend. But my job involves reviewing housing policies, including HOA practices, to be sure they follow state law. If I chose to, I could open an investigation into how this HOA enforces its rules." Michael leaned back, letting out a low whistle. "That means you outrank their entire board." "In a way," Laura said softly. "But I never wanted to use my position like that. It feels heavy-handed." Michael studied her face. "You've tried kindness and reason. Karen called the police on you. Maybe it's time to remind them you understand the law better than anyone here." Laura looked down at her tea, steam curling upward. She didn't like the idea of sounding proud or threatening. Yet she also believed that authority should be used to protect fairness. "If Karen keeps pressing, I may have to," she said at last. "But I want to start with a clear, professional letter, something that explains our rights and cites the actual regulations." Michael reached for her hand. "Whatever you decide, I'm with you." That afternoon, the rain stopped and the air turned cool and bright. Laura opened her laptop and began to draft a letter to the HOA board. Her fingers moved steadily across the keys. She quoted specific passages from the association bylaws, highlighting that nothing in them required pre-approval for small decorative plants. Then she included a second section, citing state housing codes and homeowner rights. Each sentence was calm and factual, the language professional but firm. At the end she added one line that carried quiet weight: "As Deputy Director of Housing and Community Development for the State of California, I am responsible for reviewing and ensuring fair housing practices across registered associations. I trust this HOA values compliance with state standards as much as I do." Laura read the letter twice to be sure the tone was respectful. It was not a threat, it was a statement of fact. She printed copies for every board member and prepared envelopes. Michael watched her slide the letters into place. That will get their attention, he said. It's only fair that they understand the full picture, Laura replied. I'm not hiding who I am anymore. On Monday evening, Laura and Michael walked to the small community mailbox cluster near the clubhouse. The sky glowed with a golden sunset. A few neighbors waved from their porches. Word of Saturday's police visit had already spread, but the smiles Laura received felt warm and supportive. At the mailbox, she slipped the 5 addressed envelopes into the outgoing slot. A sense of calm settled over her. Whatever came next, she had spoken the truth with clarity. The next day passed quietly until late afternoon when Michael's phone buzzed. It was an email from the HOA secretary inviting them to an urgent board meeting scheduled for that very evening. They didn't waste any time, Michael said, showing Laura the screen. Laura gave a small nod. It seems they read the letter. The clubhouse lights burned brightly when they arrived. More neighbors than usual had gathered, curious after the weekend drama. Chairs filled quickly, and a low murmur ran through the room. At the head table sat the board members, including Karen. Her usual sharp expression was noticeably softer. Papers lay neatly stacked in front of her, but she avoided eye contact with the crowd. The meeting began with routine announcements, but everyone seemed to wait for the real subject. Finally, the secretary cleared her throat. We have received a formal response from the Green family regarding the recent notice of fine. Karen shifted uncomfortably. Laura stood when invited to speak. Her voice carried steady and clear. Good evening. I want to thank the board for reviewing our appeal. I also want to state, once again, that the roses planted on our property follow both the HOA's published guidelines and the State Housing Code. She held up a copy of the letter for the record. I included references to the specific sections of the bylaws, which make no mention of needing approval for small plantings. I also outlined the relevant state statutes to ensure everyone understands our rights as homeowners. The room was silent except for the quiet shuffle of papers. Laura continued, her tone calm. I also believe it is important to share my professional role openly. I serve as Deputy Director of Housing and Community Development for the state. Part of my work is to review associations like ours to confirm that rules are applied fairly and in compliance with the law. I love this neighborhood and prefer to resolve matters as a neighbor, not an official. But I cannot ignore practices that may overstep legal boundaries. A soft ripple of surprise moved through the audience. Neighbors glanced at one another, some eyebrows raised. One board member, Mrs. Jennings, leaned toward the microphone. Mrs. Green, thank you for clarifying. After reviewing your letter and the bylaws ourselves, we see no reason for the fine to remain. I recommend we waive it immediately. Several neighbors clapped quietly. Karen's jaw tightened. For a long moment she stared at the papers before her. Then, in a voice lower than usual, she said, I agree that the fine can be removed. The secretary nodded. It is settled then. The fine is waived, and no further action will be taken. Laura inclined her head. Thank you. I appreciate the board's decision. As the meeting concluded, neighbors approached Laura and Michael with smiles and quiet words of support. You handled that with such grace, said Mrs. Turner, the elderly neighbor who had always admired the roses. I'm proud of you. You stood up for all of us, added a young father from down the street. Sometimes the rules feel heavy. It's good to know someone understands the law. Laura thanked them warmly but remained humble. It was about fairness, she said. That's all. Michael squeezed her hand as they walked home beneath the evening stars. You were amazing, he whispered. Laura smiled, though her heart felt both light and thoughtful. I only shared the truth. That's enough. Back at the house, the roses gleamed faintly under the porch light, their petals holding drops from the earlier rain. Laura paused to touch a blossom. Michael stood beside her. Karen looked different tonight. She did, Laura agreed. Maybe this will help her see that leadership isn't about power. It's about listening. Inside, Laura set the remaining copies of her letter on the counter. The conflict that had begun with a single envelope seemed to have reached a turning point. Yet she knew the story wasn't fully finished. Respect and understanding would take time to settle in the community. Still, as she looked through the kitchen window at the roses glowing softly in the dark, Laura felt something she hadn't felt since the first letter arrived: complete peace. The garden, once a small act of beauty, now stood as a quiet sign of dignity and of the strength to speak when fairness is challenged. The next morning the neighborhood felt different, as if a quiet breeze of change had passed through overnight. Michael Green noticed it the moment he stepped outside to pick up the newspaper. Neighbors who once offered only a polite nod now waved with easy smiles. A few even crossed the street to greet him. "Morning, Michael," called Mr. Robinson from across the road. "Those roses look even brighter today." Maybe it's because the board finally came to its senses. Michael thanked him, feeling both surprised and grateful. He had expected whispers after the dramatic meeting, but instead there was warmth. The community seemed relieved, as though Laura's calm stand had lifted an invisible weight. Inside the kitchen, Laura was finishing her first cup of tea. The early sunlight poured across the table, highlighting the careful notes she had written the night before. Though the fine had been waived, she wasn't celebrating. Her mind lingered on something deeper. Michael placed the newspaper beside her. "Everyone's acting friendlier this morning. Almost like they were waiting for someone to show them it was okay to speak up." Laura gave a small smile. Maybe they needed a reminder that fairness belongs to everyone, not just a few people at the top. He sat down across from her. Karen looked shaken when the board voted. "Do you think she'll try anything else?" Laura stirred her tea slowly. "I don't know. But I hope yesterday helped her see that leadership isn't about control." That afternoon Laura walked through the neighborhood, carrying a small basket of cookies she had baked. She wanted to thank those who had quietly supported her. The air smelled of fresh-cut grass and spring blossoms, and children's laughter drifted from a nearby yard. Her first stop was Mrs. Turner's house. The elderly woman opened the door with a wide grin. "Laura, dear, come in. Your roses have been the talk of the street. Everyone's so glad you stood your ground." Laura handed her the basket. "Just a little thank you for your kindness." Mrs. Turner patted her hand. "You didn't just stand up for yourself. You reminded all of us that the board answers to the community, not the other way around." Those words warmed Laura more than she expected. She left feeling lighter, her heart steady with quiet purpose. Meanwhile, Karen Mitchell sat alone at the long conference table in the HOA clubhouse. Papers were spread before her, but she barely looked at them. Her usually sharp posture sagged slightly. Karen had built her reputation on order. For years she believed that strict rules kept the neighborhood beautiful and safe. Yet the events of the past week replayed in her mind: the police call that went nowhere, the surprised faces of neighbors when Laura calmly announced her state position, the applause when the fine was lifted. For the first time in years, Karen questioned herself. Had she confused leadership with control? The clubhouse door creaked open, and Mrs. Jennings, another board member, stepped inside. "Karen," she said gently, "Can we talk?" Karen nodded, though her eyes remained on the papers. "You know," Mrs. Jennings continued, "most of the neighbors were relieved last night. Not because Laura outranks anyone, but because she showed grace. Maybe we've been too strict." Karen exhaled. "I only wanted the community to stay organized." "I know," Mrs. Jennings replied kindly. "But sometimes people need freedom to make their homes their own. Roses aren't a threat. Maybe we should think about how we apply the rules." Karen closed her eyes for a moment. "Perhaps you're right." Later that week, the HOA announced an open forum for residents to share ideas about updating the neighborhood guidelines. The notice surprised many people. Michael read it aloud when it arrived. "They want suggestions for making the rules clearer and more flexible." Laura raised her eyebrows. "That's unexpected, and encouraging." At the meeting, the clubhouse buzzed with energy. Families filled the rows of folding chairs, and neighbors who had once kept silent now spoke freely. Suggestions ranged from allowing more diverse gardens to creating a simple process for small changes without board approval. Laura listened with quiet pride. She didn't speak unless asked, but when a neighbor thanked her for inspiring the discussion, she offered a warm smile and a few thoughtful words. "This is everyone's neighborhood," she said. "Your voices matter more than any rule book." Even Karen, seated at the head table, nodded slightly. Her expression held a mix of humility and respect. The following Saturday, Michael and Laura hosted a small gathering in their backyard. The smell of grilled vegetables and fresh bread drifted through the air as neighbors arrived carrying dishes to share. Children chased each other between the rose bushes, their laughter blending with the soft music playing from a portable speaker. Mrs. Turner brought her famous peach pie. Mr. Robinson carried a tray of lemonade. Families who had never spoken more than a polite hello now lingered, talking and laughing beneath the evening sky. Michael looked around and said quietly to Laura, "It feels like the whole neighborhood changed in a week." "It feels lighter," Laura agreed. "Like people finally remember that we're supposed to be a community." Karen arrived late, carrying a plate of cookies. For a moment, the backyard grew quiet. Everyone noticed her, but Laura stepped forward with a welcoming smile. "Karen, thank you for coming," Laura said, her tone warm and sincere. Karen hesitated before speaking. "I wanted to apologize," she said. Her voice was softer than anyone had ever heard. "I acted too quickly with that fine. I thought strictness meant strength, but I see now that listening is just as important. I hope we can start over." Laura nodded kindly. "Thank you for saying that. We all want what's best for our neighborhood." Neighbors relaxed, conversation resumed, and Karen slowly joined a small circle of people near the lemonade table. For the first time in years, she looked less like a rule enforcer and more like a neighbor. As twilight deepened, Michael lit small lanterns that cast a gentle glow across the yard. The roses seemed to catch the light, their petals soft and luminous. Laura watched children run past them without fear, a simple reminder of why she had planted them in the first place, to bring beauty and joy. She stood quietly beside Michael, reflecting on the week. "It's strange," she said softly. "I thought this was about flowers. But it's really about how people treat one another." Michael slipped an arm around her shoulders. "And about how one person's calm strength can change a whole street." Laura smiled. "Not just me. Everyone here chose kindness tonight. That's what matters." Later, as the last guests drifted home and the yard grew quiet, Laura walked along the garden path. The roses gave off a faint, sweet fragrance in the cool evening air. She felt a deep sense of peace, not because she had won, but because the neighborhood had found a new balance. She thought of the first morning she planted these flowers, when they were only small buds. Back then she simply wanted color after a gray winter. She never imagined they would become a symbol of fairness, community, and quiet courage. Michael joined her, carrying 2 cups of warm tea. "To the roses," he said with a playful grin. Laura laughed softly and touched one of the blooms. "To the roses," she echoed, "and to neighbors who finally see each other." They stood together beneath the starlit sky, the soft glow of the lanterns fading to gentle embers. Around them, the neighborhood rested in a new kind of harmony, one built not on fear of fines, but on respect and connection. For Laura, that was the true victory. Spring slowly turned into early summer, and with each passing week the neighborhood showed signs of quiet transformation. The once tense atmosphere was gone. People who had barely exchanged greetings before now stopped to chat at mailboxes and along the sidewalks. Children rode bicycles in friendly clusters, their laughter ringing across lawns. Laura Green noticed it every morning when she stepped into her garden. The roses had reached their full bloom, brushing the air with a fragrance that carried across the street. But it wasn't just the flowers that felt different. It was the people. Michael joined her on the porch one bright Saturday, 2 mugs of coffee in hand. "I heard from Mr. Robinson," he said. "He wants to organize a neighborhood cleanup next weekend. Everyone's pitching in." Laura accepted her cup and smiled. "That sounds wonderful. It's amazing how quickly things have changed." "They changed because of you," Michael said, settling into a chair. "You showed everyone they could speak up." Laura shook her head gently. "I might have started it, but the neighborhood made the choice. That's what matters." Later that day, the HOA board held another open forum in the clubhouse. This time the atmosphere was light and welcoming. Long tables were set with pitchers of lemonade and small vases of flowers, some of them roses from Laura's own garden, a quiet sign of goodwill. Karen Mitchell, the longtime president, arrived early and helped arrange the chairs. She greeted people with a sincere smile that surprised many of them. When the meeting began, Karen stood and addressed the room. "Thank you all for coming. Over the past weeks, I've thought a lot about how we can improve our community. We made mistakes, and I take responsibility for them. Today, we'll vote on a revised set of guidelines that reflect what we've heard from you." Murmurs of approval filled the room. Residents leaned forward, eager to participate. One neighbor suggested allowing more personal touches: painted doors in cheerful colors, small vegetable gardens in front yards. Another recommended seasonal block parties to strengthen connections. Karen listened carefully to each idea, writing notes and asking thoughtful questions. For the first time, people saw her not as a strict enforcer but as a fellow neighbor who wanted the best for everyone. When it was Laura's turn to speak, she rose slowly. "I only want to thank you," she said. "This is exactly what we all hoped for, a place where everyone's voice matters." Applause broke out, warm and genuine. Karen looked toward Laura and gave a grateful nod. The new guidelines passed with near unanimous support. Instead of rigid fines and complicated forms, the rules focused on respect, keeping yards neat, being considerate with noise, and allowing personal expression as long as it remained safe and tidy. As the meeting ended, neighbors lingered, laughing and making plans. Some discussed hosting a summer potluck. Others talked about creating a small newsletter to share community updates. Outside, the evening sky glowed with soft pink light. Children played tag near the clubhouse lawn while adults stood in friendly clusters. It felt like the start of something hopeful. Over the next month, small but meaningful changes appeared. Mrs. Turner painted her front door a cheerful sunflower yellow. The Robinsons planted a row of lavender along their walkway. A young couple set up a small little free library, filling it with children's books and classic novels. Instead of complaints, these projects drew compliments. Neighbors stopped to admire each other's work and often offered to help. Laura's roses became a symbol of the shift. Visitors paused to take photos or ask for cuttings. Laura gladly shared clippings and tips, happy to see beauty spread from yard to yard. One warm evening in June, the first official neighborhood gathering under the new guidelines took place. Long tables were arranged along the main street, covered with checkered cloths. Dishes of every kind appeared, homemade pies, grilled vegetables, salads bright with summer colors. Michael set up a small speaker to play soft music. Children wove between the tables, carrying cups of lemonade and laughing as fireflies flickered in the dusky air. Karen arrived carrying a tray of fresh cookies. She greeted Laura warmly. "I hope these go well with the lemonade," she said. "They will," Laura replied with an easy smile. "I'm glad you're here." Karen looked around at the lively scene. "I have to admit, I was wrong before," she said quietly. "I thought strict rules kept a community together, but it's really moments like this that do." Laura nodded. "Sometimes it takes a little conflict to remind us what matters." Karen glanced at the children running past and smiled. "I'm learning that." As twilight settled, a neighbor raised a toast. "To our community," he said, holding his glass high. "To kindness, to understanding, and to the people who helped us remember what neighbors are supposed to be." Everyone echoed the words. Glasses clinked, and a warm cheer rose into the summer night. Laura stood beside Michael, feeling a quiet pride. This was not a victory in the usual sense, it was something better. It was a shared moment of trust. Later, when the tables were cleared and only a handful of people remained, Karen approached Laura and Michael once more. "I wanted to thank you," Karen said, her voice steady. "You could have humiliated me after everything I did. Instead, you treated me with respect. That gave me the courage to change." Laura touched her arm lightly. "It's never too late to listen. We're all neighbors here." Michael added with a smile, "The neighborhood's stronger now. That's something we can all be proud of." Karen's eyes softened. "I agree." Weeks passed, and the changes proved lasting. There were no sudden reversals, no hidden grudges waiting to surface. The new spirit of cooperation became part of daily life. Laura continued her work at the State Environmental Office, often traveling to nearby towns to speak about sustainable landscaping. People from other neighborhoods even came to visit her garden, curious to learn how a simple patch of roses could spark such harmony. Michael loved to tell the story when visitors asked. "It started with a fine for $90, he would say with a grin. But it ended with the community finding its heart." One quiet Sunday evening, Laura walked the garden path as the sky turned a deep blue. The roses glowed faintly in the fading light, their petals soft as velvet. She thought back to the first days of conflict, the letter taped to their door, the tense meeting, the uneasy stares. Now those memories felt distant, like a storm long past. Michael joined her, carrying 2 mugs of tea. "I think the roses like all this attention," he said playfully. Laura laughed. "Maybe they do. But I think what they like most is the kindness around them." They stood together, watching the stars appear one by one. The neighborhood was quiet except for the gentle hum of summer insects and the soft breeze rustling the leaves. Laura felt a deep, calm joy. This wasn't about winning an argument or proving authority. It was about neighbors finding each other again, about small acts of grace that could change the shape of a whole community. She reached out and touched a rose bloom, its fragrance drifting upward. To the roses, she whispered. Michael raised his cup in agreement. And to every neighbor who learned to listen. The night deepened, carrying with it the simple truth that had guided everything: respect and understanding could turn even the smallest conflict into something beautiful. In the soft moonlight, the garden seemed to shine not with power, but with the quiet strength of a community that had finally discovered its heart.